With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Moyach Daf Memches. We are continuing with the inquiries, with the boyas of Rav Papa, as we started yesterday, noch with the Namanik, Bein Habinayim, Poshat, Umachatz, Upizer, Vechishev, Bachafino, is Chaveroi. We're going to be learning, some of these inquiries will be about Kemitza, and others will be about the din of Chafina. We're going to have some halachas, some review of the halachas of Kabbalah Saddam. We're going to inquire whether a kohen is allowed to gather up the ketoides if it fell out of his hands after he took it the first time from the shovel, as we learned in the beginning of this Perek. We're going to have this unique midah through which the Torah is nedreshes, not part of the Yud Gimel midos, at least not explicitly, which is known as goyden umoisifin v'dorshin, that we can take a letter from one word, we can take it off one word, we can add it to another word, and from that expound and learn, or at least find in the written Torah an allusion, a hint to the Torah Shabbat Peh. We're going to question whether pigul could be affected during the lead up to the bringing the ketoides into the Kodesh Kachim. As we know that if a person has a machshava chutz lizman during any one of the four main steps prior to zirikas hadam, including zirikas hadam, shchita, kabbalah, hoilacha, and zirika, then is where if you have a machshava chutz lizman, you affect pigul. Okay, here with the kohen gadol is doing gachafina, he's putting it into the ladle, he's going to be bringing it into the kodesh kachim. During those steps, if he has a machshavas chutz lizman, when he cups up the ketoides, he thinks he's going to bring it in tomorrow to the kodesh kachim. Will that be effective in negatively? Will that make that ketoides into pigul or not? We're going to be questioning b'chlal whether hoilacha could be done with the left hand. Rab Sheshes is going to say yes, and Rab Sheshes will be refuted. And being that Daf Memches is relatively, at least when we're learning in our style, is short, we're going to, God willing, go into Daf Memtes. We're going to learn on Daf Memtes the final of the 7 inquiries of Rav Papa, the one that's alluded to with the Namanik of Chaveroi, and that's going to be followed and going to be linked to the final boya we're going to ask today, and that is that if a kohen gadol did chafina and the kohen gadol passed away, and now you have the backup kohen gadol, does the backup kohen gadol need to make a new chafina? Or can he take that ketoides which was already gathered by the original kohen gadol and enter in the kodesh kachim? Now, what's going to be very interesting is regarding this final inquiry, there's going to be a lot of secondary discussion, a lot of background to this boya, and I think we'll leave off today with this question opened, and God willing, tomorrow, if we'll have time, we'll start just a few minutes earlier, and we will, God willing, learn 2 Daf Memtes and Nun, and respond to this final inquiry, and much, much more. So we left off on the end, mamash, the last word of Daf Mem Zayin Amid Beis, behemshech to the series of inquiries by Rav Papa, boyi, turning to Daf Memches, Rav Papa, regarding the following. And this inquiry is going to be regarding kemitza. So you gather the materials from which the kohen is going to take the kemitza of the karban mincha and bring it up and offer it and burn it on the mizbeach. Now, the original flour, oil, water, whatever type of mincha you're bringing is in a keli, and it is from that utensil that the kohen takes the kemitza. The kemitza is tantamount to the act of shchita when we're comparing to the karbanos. And just like after the shchita, by an animal, you have Kabbalah. So the Kabbalah by a karban mincha is the placement of the kemitza, of this fistful of flour, of the flour offering, and it was put in a klei shadas. Now, when we will learn menachas, sometimes we refer to this to the second klei shadas because it's beginning with a klei shadas. But there are huge halachic differences between the original klei shadas and the second one. It's the second klei shadas that imbues the kemitza with an upgraded level of kedusha. And it's mamash like the dam going into the mizrak. So asks Rav Papa, instead of the kohen putting in the kemitza properly in this klei shadas, what happens if dapke lekoimitz bedoift on the manam? The kohen pastes the kemitza only on the wall in the inner wall of this klei sharis sheni, not that he does what he normally should do, which is placing the kemitza, so to say, on the bottom, on the floor of the keli. He doesn't do that. He sticks it in the inner wall of the klei sharis. Mai. What's the question? Do we say toich kli ba'inan? And yes, it's inside the keli, and this step of what's tantamount to Kabbalah, the placement in the klei sharis, was effective. Oidilma, what is needed by the kemitza is a proper hanacha. Hanacha b'toichai kitiknoi be'inan, a proper placement. Very good picture. And the proper placement is that it should be resting on the ground, on the floor of the keli, and v'haleka. And therefore, for this baya, we say, teiku, this stance. Now, here we're going to make a short interruption. And the reason why we're going to bring in another baya of Mar Baravashi, because it is very similar to the baya of Rav Papa. Baya Mar Baravashi. What happens if Afchei Lamana, we are still continuing to learn a question regarding Kemitza, if the Keli was turned upside down, and you can just understand that there are many different approaches in the Rishonim, but let's try to imagine that the clay sharis in which the Kemitza is placed, if you were to turn it upside down, it's not that it's completely flat, but there's a little bit of a rounding of the base of the clay sharis. So when you turn it upside down, you have now, very good, you have now a new receptacle. It's the flipped over clay sharis isn't flat, but when you turn it upside down, it has an indentation. And you stuck it onto the floor. You put it all the way in the bottom of this utensil. You pasted it to the bottom. Mahu. Do we say hanacha b'toicha b'in v'ha'ika? Again, this is similar to the baya of Rav Papa. All we need is that the kemitza should be placed inside, and it's placed inside. Oy dilma, if we are looking for kitiknoi proper, that hanacha kitiknoi be'inan and v'haleka, and similar to the baya of Rav Papa, the Gemara says that this question is also teku, it stands, tishbi yataretz, etc. Weiter. Now we're coming back to Yom Kippur, to Chafina, Boy Rav Papa, Maloi Chafnav, Sha'amru, the Kohen Gadol originally, with his hands, has to take from this machta that came from the Lishkas Beis Haftinas, and he cups his hands and he fills them both up. Do we say that they can be mechukais? Mechukais means leveled, not that they have to be leveled, means the lowest possible. Is leveled enough. It's not, is it, maybe it's maloi. Maloi means full, but what's shot full? Or dafke gedushas. Gedushas means really heaped over. Now, guys, remember that by koimitz, at the end of Daf Mem Zayin Amud Aleph, right, we brought the Braisa to tell us that mevoirats, that overflowing by a kemitza is not okay, because by kemitza and Parshas Sav, the Torah has a base, bikumtzai, in the koimitz. Okay, we don't have such a word over here. So Amar Lei Rabbi Abba Le Ravashi regarding this boya Tashima. He quotes a Braisa. It says in the Braisa, Meloi Chafnav Sha'amru, Loi Mechukais, Veloi Gedushais, Ela Tefufais. Tefufais means rounded. Rounded means more than leveled, but less than heaped. In other words, there's a little mound that's rising right above the level of the cupped hands. That's the pshat, that's the taich of Meloi Chafnav. Says the Gemara Tanan Hassan, we learned in Zivachim that if Nishbach Hadam al Haritzbam, that if after the Shchita, the blood didn't first go into the mizrak, into the utensil as it should. It went directly from the incision, from the neck of the animal, on to the floor. Even though va'asafai, the kohen gathered it all up, nevertheless, the halacha is that it's possible. However, if the kohen properly received it from the neck into the keli, and for whatever reason, the kohen slipped, for whatever reason, all of the dam that was received fell from the keli onto the ground, ala ritzvah, here we could, va'asafai, it's kosher. You guys remember, that's why we learned that, for example, Erev Pesach, right? If you hold Kishitas Rabbi Yehuda, right, that min b'mino is not batul, that they would scoop up some of the dam from the ritzvah, and a kohen would put it on the mizbeach just in case someone's Korban Pesach's dam that first went into the keli, then all fell on the ground, then you save that carbon by gathering it up. Okay, so says the Gemara, where do we get that from? I just want to add another interesting detail, that if the dam went from the incision on the ground, and the Mishnah says that it's possible, that there is no dam hanefesh left still spurting out of the animal. If some of the dam falls directly on the floor, even though, as we'll learn in this Braisa, lechatchila, you're supposed to try to gather all of the life blood, which is all of the blood that's spurting out. But if you didn't gather all of it, as long as you gathered some of it, enough to throw it on the mizbeach, you're good. So when it says in the Reisha that if it fell on the floor, it means that all of it fell on the floor. Nothing is still leaving the animal's neck. Indeed, it's possible. And we know Hanamili, the Tanach Rabbanon, when it says V'lokach midam hapar. Now this is in the portion of Vayikra, when the Torah goes through a series of different types of karbanos chatois. Here we're speaking about the Kohen Mashiach, that if he sins under certain circumstances, he doesn't bring the female animal, but he brings the pod, the bull. And the word velakach, taking, just to know, velakach is the source of Kabbalah. That's the Kabbalah. Velakach midam hapar. Now, midam hapar means the blood. That's the very essence of the bull. It's the blood that is the essence of the bull. And as we'll speak out in a moment, that refers to dam hanefesh. Now, there are different types of bloods. There are different colors of bloods. Very generally speaking, you have the blood that is in the surface, in the periphery of the animal, or the skin blood. But when you make a cut, almost anywhere in the body, some dam will go out. That's not the blood that you need to receive. After the blood finishes spurting out, you have what's called the remnant blood, the dam hatamtzitz. That's also not the blood that needs to be received nor put on the altar. It has no effect. But as we'll see, midam hapar means the dam hanefesh. So it says the Braisa, midam hanefesh, v'loi midam ha'oir, not from the blood of the skin, v'loi midam hatamtzitz, not from the remnant blood. Now the Braisa has another limud, and this is phenomenal. Instead of reading the words midam hapar, right, from the dam of the par, actually that would mean that you don't have to take all of it, not even lachatchila. Take from of it, take the mem off the dam, not midam dam, mehapar, put the mem in front of the bull, and the pshat is dam mehapar yikablenu. That's the source of the Mishnah. The blood has to be received directly from the incision, from the body of the pod, and not that the dam went on the floor and then you retrieved it off the floor. Even if you retrieved all of it, it will not be effective. Now, the salka daitoch, that midam hapar, don't change the letter mem. Leave it the way it's written. And midam hapar then would mean from the blood means not all the blood. Midam afila mixas dam. No, that can't be. Because so Amar Rabbi Yehuda, we have a tradition that hamakabel, the coin that's receiving the dam, tzarech should make an effort. She yakabel as kol damai sholpar. And where do we have that? He has another source. Shneimar, as it says, ves kol dam hapar yishbach el yisoid mizbach. And again, guys, this is the rule by Kachim, that if the Torah doesn't repeat it twice, then it's not essential. So even though we have an explicit pasuk that says kol hadam hapar yishbach, just to make it clear that bidi eved, you don't need all the dam. Bidi eved, you don't need all the dam, but the fact that it says es kol hapar yishbach, which means it's a mitzvah to gather all their blood, elo shma mina, that it says in the pasuk that we just quoted, that midam hapar, you got to move around the letter, dam mehapar yikadlenu. In other words, one of the Midrash in the Dreshes, the Kosavar Goyrin, that's a great example, that you take away the letter Mem and you use it by adding it in another word, at least here it's juxtaposed. And that is the drasha from which we see in the Torah Shebechsav, that which God taught us. Now, why are we bringing all of this then over here? That all of this is a Hagdama for the next Boya of Rav Papa. So now, Boya Rav Papa, now that we established that first there has to be a placement in a vessel. Then if it's scattered, if it falls on the floor, it can be rectified. But if it lechatchila falls on the ground before the Kabbalah, then it's invalidated. What happens? Nispazir haketoides mimoloi chafnav mahum. So let's go through the steps in our Masechta. The Kohen Gadol was brought to the Kohen Gadol a machta filled with ketoides from the Beis Avtinas. He has to scoop it up, miloi chafnav. He would then place it into the kaf. Gavaldik. What happens if the ketoides doesn't go into the kaf from his cupped hands? Again, he trips, and it all falls on the ground. Oh, Gavaldik. So do we say yadoi, that the hands of the Kohen Gadol is just like the neck of the animal, which means that it has to go from his hands into the ladle, and since it went straight on the floor, you can't even gather it up. It became invalidated. Oy dilman. No, pum fakert. His hands are just like the clay shadis, and if it falls out of the mizrak onto the floor, it's rectifiable. Pick it up. V'loy pesulam. For this again, we say teku. Now, all of the boys are really linked if you think about it one to the other. So now says the Gemara, what happens? We're trying to understand how do we compare the steps that the Kohen Gadol does to the ketoides to the steps that we do by every animal, shchita, kabbalah, hoilacha, and zrika. And the question therefore will be, if chishev b'chafina, if when the Kohen Gadol does the act of chafina, if wrongfully, but if he has in mind that he's going to be offering this ketoides chutz lizman, for example, tomorrow, really, the same boya is if he has a machshavas chutz lamakim. I'm going to be offering this ketoides not on the kodesh kachim. Same question, just to know just to quickly review that machshavas chutz lizman affects pigol. If someone eats of it, you're chayv kodesh. Machshavas chutz lamakim affects psul. You're not allowed to eat from it, but there's no chiyuv kodesh. Now, Papa is just focusing on pigul. Really, it's on all types of invalidating intentions. Does the act of chafina, is that tantamount to the four, to the shchita, to the kabbalah, or not? Or not? You know, it's like the avodah begins when you put it on the coals in the kodesh kachim, and all of the intentions that you had prior won't affect a pigul. That's his question. Mahu, do we say? Now here's a little bit of a difficult line that Yalef Meloy Mincha that we learned the Gzeira Shava. Guys, remember that on Daf Mem Zayin Amud Aleph, we began really, and then Mem Zayin Amud Beis with two inquiries. But let's go to the original one regarding the din of Mevoidots, right? Can it be overflowing? Now the din that it cannot be overflowing because it has to fit Bikuntzai is written by Kemitza. The question is, do you learn from Kemitza to the Meloy Chafnav? Right? And that also led us to the question of Bein Habinayim, is there a Gzeira Shava or not? And let's also not forget that yesterday when Rav Papa began to ask the first boya, right away the Gemara challenged Rav Papa. Well, if that's the case, you're really just extending the question whether we have a Gzeira Shava or not. So we already learned yesterday that there's a premise that if a boya is contingent on whether we have Maloi or not, we don't need Rav Papa to ask. That was already asked and it wasn't answered, and we don't need for anyone to add more details to it. Obviously, like Rashi speaks out over here, that even if we're going to say that we don't have Maloi for details, which is whatever we learned yesterday on Amud Aleph and on Amud Beis is called a detail, still Rashi says, maybe you still learn enough Maloi for this boya, which is mahasa mahanya machshava, just like by kamitza. We do compare kamitza to the act of shchita. We have 4 steps by an animal, shchita, kabbalah, hilach, and zrika. You know what? You have 4 steps by a mincha. And that is the kamitza is like the shchita, the sina b'keli is like the kabbalah, hilach is hilacha, and the burning, the haktara, is like the zrika. And yes, by a mincha, if during any one of those 4 steps the kohen has a machshavas chutz lisman, he's going to make the mincha into pigul. So hachinami mahanya b'machshava, the act of the chafina will also be a necessary, essential, not preparatory act of avodah, and therefore a machshavas pigul will be effective negatively. And here's the Rashi, which again is difficult, but Rashi just makes it clear that we're not going to counter hainu hach because it's not hainu hach. Even if we're not going to use maloi for details, perhaps still we should learn enough from a mincha that, you know, the steps leading up to the burning to the burning care of the ketores are considered steps of avodah. And if that will be viewed that way, then yes, then machshava spiegel would be effective. So Amalei Rav Shimi Barashi Rav Papa, here we will try to respond. Toshama is quoting a Mishnah from Eduyos that Hoysev Rabbi Akiva, and we're going to go with the girsa hasoilas, fine flour that's in a utensil, ketoides that's in a utensil, levoina, frankincense that's in a utensil, and even coals that's in a utensil. If she'im naga tvul yoim b'miktsasa, and if a tvul yoim touches even one part of it, pasalas kulan. Now this Mishnah, this testimony of Rabbi Akiva has two huge chidushim. Chidush number one is like this. If you remember, b'chlal, when it comes to the laws of Tum and Tara, that if I touch an item, whatever level I am at, normally I convey Tumah and it goes down one notch. But let's say I'm an Av, and there's a couple of pieces of meat that meats are touching each other. There's one steak, there's another steak, there's a third steak. If I touch one, that one had contact with me becomes a rishon. They don't all become rishons. Now, can a rishon make a sheni? Can a sheni make a shlishi? Okay, that's all of the dinim. Truma can even become a shlishi. Kachim can become a revi. But the food items that don't have direct contact with the source of tuma, they don't only go down one notch from the source of tuma. It progressively goes down. So what Rabbi Akiva said is that if you have utensils that are in a keli, the keli makes them all considered as if they are one unit. That's a big chiddush. So he's just giving practical examples that it was common that in the Beis Hamikdash you have flour. Now flour are granules of flour. They can be very little, but they're shtikalach. So one might have thought that if a source of tumah touches one part of the bowl, that which touched the finger or the hand or whatever, that becomes a Tomei, whatever level. If the person is an Av, it becomes a Rishon. You have even by Chulin, Sheni, Midrash, we learned Tamsachim. If the person is a Rishon, it becomes a Sheni, etc. But what happens to the flour that's near the flour? That's one step removed, that's 2 grains removed. So Rabbi Akiva testified that the Chachamim established that it's all considered one unit. And that's by flour, and that's by ketoides, and that's by frankincense, also made out of little kernels, little pieces. Coals. Number 2, Rabbi Akiva had a bigger testimony that one might have thought that this concept that a keli unites its contents to be considered one unit, which is a derabanan, is only if the tumah is beginning with a very high level of tumah. But what happens if the source of tumah is what we call a tful yom? A tful yom cannot even be matama ma'aser sheni, as we learn in the 3rd chapter of Chagiga. A tful yom only has the power, right, to invalidate, to passel truma, or worse, truma or kachin. So Rabbi Akiva said these 2 nakudas, that the din that the keli gathers and makes everything in it as one unit is even if the source of tuma is a shvacha source, it's only a tful yom. If he touches one edge of it, pasel eskulon. So now, what does this have to do with that? So kosal kodaitoch. This is the logic of Rav Shimi, that since mi de pasal tful yoim. Now let's remember something, like we just mentioned, that tful yoim cannot be matama anything. Certainly cannot be matama chulin. Tful yoim cannot even be matama ma'aser sheni. What could the tful yoim be matama? Let me word it this way. Only something that has inherent kedusha. Something that's only imbued with kedusha's damim is not susceptible to receiving tuma if the source is only a tful yoim. So since we also mentioned the ketores, that it could become tummy from a tful yoim, is the charaya that the ketores, once it's already gathered in a keli, already is imbued with kedushas haguf, which therefore leads us to know another detail, that anything that has kedushas damim only will never become invalid just because it was overnighted and not used. Obviously, not all the storage in the Beis Hamikdash will become puzzle. If we say that it can become puzzle through a tful yoim, which means it already has kedushas haguf, therefore it automatically means that paslanami lina, and anything that can already become invalidated through lina, that's his conclusion logically. Umidalina paslanami machshava. Gewaldig. Okay, let's go weiter. We have a little amen over here. Next question. Chishev b'chatias gecholim mahu. Again, it's a similar question. If while the kohen is shoveling the coals that will be used for the ketreidus offering lefnai v'lefnim, what happens if then he had a machshavas chutz lizman? Oh, I'm going to bring these coals in tomorrow in the kodesh kachim, or a machshavas chutz lamakin. Again, mahu, will that machshava during the shoveling invalidate, make pigul the coals? Do we say machshire mitzvah ke mitzvah dami? Look inside Rashi, v'havele ke machashev be'avoida, or oiloi. Then Rashi says gavaldik lashon acher, that this boy chishev b'chatias gecholim al sheifslu gecholim b'machshava melahakter aleim. No, lashon acher is that this boy was never that during the shoveling of the coals you should invalidate the ketores. What does one have to do with the other? Do the coals become invalid? Now the coals are not being offered, but that's the word. Do we say that since the only way to offer the ketores is by putting it on hot coals, so the coals have the status of machshirei mitzvah? Now that we established at the end of Memches Amud Aleph that on the ketores itself, at the points when you do the chafina, you could be machashev machshavas pigul. It's effective. So now do we extend it even to the coals? Again, not lashon acher, that the coals should become possible. For that we say tekel. And this is really an amazing Gemara, because there are many other times that we have throughout Chazal, we try to qualify the status of a machshirei mitzvah, and that will be a great source. The fact that there's a boya, can you imagine that you can affect pigul, even if it's only on the coals? It's mamish, it's not a korban. But you cannot bring the carbon without it. That really upgrades, that gives you an insight how we could at least view the importance of machshirei mitzvah. You know, the Rebbe's word regarding all of the items that were created ben hashmashas. Why were they created ben hashmashas? Everything that was created for Adam. So anything that's not needed for Adam's avodah to bring Mashiach was created after Adam. That's the premise. And the final yesh oimrim af tzfas b'tzfas asuya. So the Rebbe explains that the first tongue, to make a tongue utensil, to make a pliers, the emes, we have all of the Rishonim ask, you can put it in a mold, but we're going with the premise that you need a tongue, you need a pliers to make the tongue. So who made the original tongue? God made it ben hashmashas. And the Rebbe's explanation is that based on the premise that all of the items ben hashmashas are post the coming of Mashiach, prior to Mashiach, a tongue is a machshir. In order for me to do my job, I need a tool. How do we view machshirim? That prior to Mashiach, you have the ikid, then you have the machshir. And we don't give enough chashivas to the machshir. One of the beautiful things that will change in the Messianic era after Mashiach reveals himself is that we're going to begin to appreciate how every step prior to an avodah, if it was necessary, Itaka has the chashivas of the mitzvah itself. So God made the original tongue, being machshiv, the machshir. Let's go right. Now, guys, we're taking a step back. This is not Rav Papa. This is a huge general question. Let's not forget that when it comes to the offering of all karbanos, the step of hoilacha is not essential. Now, of course, if you shechted the animal away from the mizbeach, you have to convey it to the mizbeach. But just to know, if a person shechted an animal right by the wall of the mizbeach, then you do shchita, kabbalah, and zrika. And taka, we learned in Zvachim a lot about hoilacha. We also have a general rule that when it comes to the avodah of kohanim, whenever the Torah uses the word avodah, the rule is, and whenever the Torah uses the word kohen, it has to be done biyad yeminoi. Question is, they asked from an absheshes hoilacha bismoil mahum. Again, we're not speaking about chafina, we're not speaking about kemetza, we're speaking bachlal by korbanos. Here at Rashi, around 8-9 lines from the top of the Amid. Hoilacha bismoil mau. Hoilachas hadam mi boyale. Kabbalah and Zedika Zakt Rashi, since the Torah uses the words kohuna, then pshitalan, because of the klau that the chol makim shenemar etzba, or the word kohuna, eina ella yamin. Aval hoilacha vayta, says Rashi, since liksiv bahadei, you don't have, it's not written, you do hoilacha. And indeed, it's not always needed. Umida apka rachmana likabala b'lashon hoilacha. Now, where do we know that you have to do Hailach? It's learned from the pasuk of Kabbalah, the Tanya, V'ikrivu zu Kabbalah Sadam. So, Nafkalama Masech Chagiga, that Kabbalah is an Avodah. I'm sorry, that V'ikrivu there means Hailach. So we learned that if Hailach is done, we call it an Avodah. So, for example, if you have Machshavas Pigul by Hailach, it's going to affect it into Pigul. The question is, will we invalidate it if it was done on the left hand? Because the loy ksiv ba'kuhuna bahadei. So could you convey the dam, and therefore can you convey the kleisharis that has in it the mincha with the left hand? Will it invalidate that step? So Amar lahu Rab Sheshes tinisua. I'll answer you from our Mishnah. What does it say in our Mishnah? That the Kohen Gadol would take the machto, the coals that have in it, the shovel that has in it the coals with his right hand, and he takes the kaf that has in it the malay chafnav bismailoi, and he conveys it into the kodesh kachim. Now you have to appreciate where the Gemara brought this in. It's now that we already established, we linked that the steps, like at least there was a havamina that maybe pigul should be effective. Or that maybe after the chafina, if it falls on the ground, maybe it's okay. Why is it maybe okay? Because you already were makabel it. In other words, the steps leading up to the burning of the ketledes lefnai v'lefnim might have a status of a bona fide avoida. And if that would be the case, the fact that clearly the Kohen Gadol brought the ladle with the left hand is araya that conveying can be done with the left. Okay. Now, by the way, Rab Sheshes will be refuted, as we'll see on Daf Mem Tes, but before we refute Rab Sheshes, asks the Gemara on Rab Sheshes that why did he have to go and bring a raya from our Mishnah? What's wrong with our Mishnah? There's nothing wrong with our Mishnah, but don't forget that our Mishnah is not speaking about an animal carbon. Our Mishnah is speaking about the offering of ketaitis. And on the other hand, we did have various inquiries until now, whether we compare the steps leading up to the ketaitis to the steps of Avodah leading up to the throwing of the dam. Why didn't Rab Sheshes bring a raya from an animal carbon? We have this Mishnah in Talmud and in other places regarding, we even had it earlier in Yoma, just regarding the specifics of that there were 9 kohanim bringing up all of the animal parts. And remember the details, who brings up what? And the Mishnah says clearly that haregel shel yamin, that the right hind leg, the one that was zacha in the pious to bring up that animal part, is brought up in the left hand of this kohen. Right, he had something else in the right hand. With another detail, base oida lachutz, that the place, we don't want for the cut, for the incision, which doesn't look so nice, to be facing the crowd. We have that facing the kohen that's bringing it up. Bottom line is that you see that when it comes to bringing up the limbs of the animal to the mizbeach, the kohen would hold it in the left hand. So why isn't that a better proof? At least it's not about the dam, but it's about an animal. And you're coming here to the ketaitis. So Count explains the Gemara. No, the reason why Rab Sheshes did not quote that Mishnah, because Hassan, if that would have been a source, one could have challenged it by saying, let's not forget the avoid of dam is ma'akif. The avoid of dam means takashchita, kabbalah, hoilacha, zirikas hadam, because without dam there is no atonement. Avol hoilacha, right? So over there, when it comes to the limbs and the fats of the animal, right? We are learning it's a big mitzvah, but if it was not brought, atonement is achieved. So one would have argued the reason why we're not medagdek yamin or smoil, and lachatchila, he brought it up to smile, is because it's speaking about the limbs that are not ma'akiv in the kapara. Avali lacha the ma'akva kapara, conveying of the blood. Now the blood has to be sprinkled. You might have thought that no step may be done with the left hand. So that's why Rab Sheshes Dafke brought a raya from our Mishnah in Yoma that's speaking about the ketaitis. Now the ketaitis has to be brought. You can't skip this step. It's essential. Without the avoid of the ketaitis, you don't have the avoid of the ketaitis. So that's a much better raya that smoil by the conveying by the halacha is not ma'akev. And the Gemara right away now from a Braisa will refute Rab Sheshes. It's not the end of the world. The Amoraim did not have access to many of the works of the Baraisas, and Toseftas, and Midrashim, and indeed, when he heard it, he accepted that he was refuted. So the proof against Rab Sheshes, Meisvei Daf Memtes, is from the following Baraisa. If you have a Zor, a non-Kohen, or, guys, every other step in the Baraisa from now on is the Kohen. Or if there's a Kohen, but he is an Oinen. In other words, there was a death of an immediate family member on that day, and the Kohen may not do the Avodah then. Or if the Kohen, but he's Shikr, however you define the Shikr, who may not do the Avodah. Or if there's a Kohen that has a halachic blemish. So says the Baraisa that Bakabbalah, Ubahilacha, Ubezrika, Pasal. Which, just by the way, you see clearly over here that when we have the din that Shchitas Ksheda Bizar, I think someone asked it on the chat, whether a Balmum can do the Shchita. The answer is yes, clearly. In other words, just like Shchitas Ksheda Bizar, a Balmum can do the Shchita, but let's go further. But the Oinen, the Shikha, the Balmum, may not do Kabbalah, Haylacha, and Zrika. Furthermore, the halacha that avodah needs to be done standing goes again from the Kabbalah, Haylacha, and Zrika. Yoshev, if someone sat while they did any one of these steps, now how can you sit by Haylacha? You can't. So obviously it goes to the Kabbalah or it goes to the Pasal. V'chein smile, clear, explicit, that when it comes to Haylacha Sadam and subsequently Haylacha of the clay that has in it the Kemitza, if you held it in your left hand, Pasal, clear, indeed, to Yufta. Problem is, yeah, Danny.
So what about the Kohen Gadol? How is it okay when he did it?
Wait a second. Good, I'll get to that. We quoted that up Chaim. Hold on. But before that, the Gemara asks, it's not the end of the world. Some Amoraim they never learned it. So they didn't know it. But Rab Sheshes didn't know this Braisa. We know that Rab Sheshes used this Braisa to challenge a colleague. For her, 3 lines from the top, Rab Sheshes, who the Oisla, Rab Sheshes used this Braisa to challenge someone else. What happened? To Amar Rab Sheshes, La Amoide de Rab Chizdam. The Amoide, we're not giving his name, but he was the speaker. He was the loud voice. He was the Amoide of Rab Chizdam. And so sometimes if you didn't have access to the tzaddik, today you go to the Gabbai. Right? So Rab Sheshes asked the speaker of Rab Chizda, do me a favor, but bo mi name Rab Chizda, ask Rab Chizda. Now he didn't ask about the left. He wanted to know whether Haylacha bizar mahu. Based on the fact that Haylacha doesn't need to happen. If the animal was slaughtered mamish by the mizbeach, you don't need Haylacha. So maybe Haylacha coming down with the zar. And okay, so he asked the question to Rab Chizda, and Amalei Rab Chizda tells his Amoira, who repeated it to Rab Sheshes, that taka kosher, and he brought the pasuk from Divrei Hayamim Mikra Misayeni. It says, "Vayishchatu apasach, vayisruku hakohanim mi yodam." They were speaking about how Leviim were involved at some point. So it says that the kohanim, right, they threw the blood, which they have taken from the hands of the Leviim. That's mamash mashma that the Leviim brought it all the way to the Mizbeach. That's what it's mashma. And the Kohanim took it from the Leviim. And while the Kohanim were doing Zrika, shteit vaited, v'haleviim avshitim, the Leviim were busy flaying the animal. So it sounds from that pasuk that there was a time that we needed outside help, and so we took help where we are allowed to take help, and that was by the Hilachah. So that is what Rab Chizda answered. And we know that Rab Sheshes refuted Rab Chizda successfully. You know, we're from this Braisa. Rab Sheshes taken the Braisa. He knew the Braisa. Zor, a non-kohen, or a kohen who's an oinen, a shikr, or a balmum. Any one of the 3. Bakabbalah, Bohilacha, Ubezrika, Pasal. V'chein Yoshev, v'chein Smel, Pasal. So the Gemara says, Yashakoyach. Rab Sheshes did not know the Braisa. Therefore, he said that Hilacha b'Smail is kosher. Then someone, right, brought to his attention this Braisa, and Rab Sheshes acquiesced. I'm refuted. But now that he heard this Braisa, now he had the right to use it to refute Rab Chizda. Basar the Shama, Chadar Oisvam. But now the problem is, okay, fine, we're going to accept the Torah Shabbat Peh. We know the Braisa is the emes, but how do you understand the pasuk in Divrei Hayamim? For Rab Chizda Kraka Amar answers the Gemara like this: that what happened was they needed help, but it wasn't that the Levium were allowed to actually walk with the dam. The avud might say it's tabam, that the Levium were like a stand. That means that if sometime I need to use myself to do something else, where do I put the mizrak? Again, let's not forget that the mizrak had no bottom. So there were Levium present in that area. If need be, Kohen Aleph would hand it to a Levi. The Levi was not allowed to walk. He took no step. He was like a stand. And then another Kohen, or the same Kohen, when he became available, would take it from the hands of the Levium. And Achanami, they took it miyadam, but the Levium did no hoilacha whatsoever. All right, now, Chavra, we will continue. And let's come now to the final Baya Rav Papa. Right, this is the final inquiry, the Chaveiroi. Chafan Chaveiroi. If one Kohen Gadol did the Chafina, one Kohen did the Chafina, v'nasan l'toich chafanav, and he gave it and he put it in the hands of the Kohen Gadol. So do we say Meloi Chafnav? Now Chafnav, his cupped hands, the parsha of Achri Mois is speaking about the Kohen Gadol. So Be'inon, so it's in the cupped hands of the Kohen Gadol. No, is it the action or is it the result? Does it have to be in his full cupped hands? That there has to be the act of taking it, and that and that is the final question for which we say take. Okay, and now behemshach to the boys of Rav Papa. We have time. Let's begin now with this. Boya Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. What's going to be a little bit unusual is that we're going to have a very simple baya, but before we even get to resolve the baya, there's going to be a lot of secondary discussion, fascinating discussion. So let's begin. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi asked the following baya: Chafan v'meis, not another Kohen. The Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol did chafina, and God forbid, at that moment he passes away. Now we have a backup Kohen Gadol. Question is, does the backup Kohen Gadol, does he have to make a new chafina, or can he use the chafina from the Kohen Gadol that just passed? Now, people don't think that it's mamish linked to the boya before, because what was the last boya of Rav Papa? Whether the Kohen Gadol that's entering the Kodesh Kachim, whether he's the one that needs to do it, or whether someone else can do it. Here it's more than that, because the someone else of Rav Papa's boya was a non-Kohen Gadol. And if you're going to say that v'lokach vehevi, there's no v'lokach vehevi. You need a v'lokach from the Kohen Gadol. Here you have the v'lokach of the Kohen Gadol. Elamah, the Kohen Gadol passed away, and there's going to be a hemshach of the avodah by the backup Kohen Gadol. Question is, does he have to go back to this step and make his own chafina? Now, we're going to respond to this question, God willing, tomorrow, mamash towards the end of the Amid, but listen to this shtickle Gemara back and forth, a whole new topic. So Amar Rabbi Chanina, when he heard this question from Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, so he expressed himself with excitement by saying, he says, wow, come and see that this is the inquiry of the earlier ones, mashma, that Rabbi Chanina considered himself to be from the later generation. Rabbi Chanina asked a question. He himself had that question. And when he heard that the Rishonim, that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi also asked a question, Baruch Shekevanti. That's the way it is. Sometimes when you learn and you hear someone else's voice, it's not that they are responding to your question. You are happy that at least you knew what's a question. A big part of learning is to figure out what's a shayla and what's not a question. So he was authenticated. He was rejoicing by the fact that the Rishonim asked that question. Now, this is what Rabbi Chanina indeed said, or this is what he meant. That obviously implies that Rabbi Chanina considered Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi the Rishonim. The Rishonim doesn't have to be that he lived in a different generation, but he came earlier. He was from the earlier ones, and Rabbi Chanina says, "Wow, I like that he asked that. Now I'm happy when I asked that question. The Rishonim already asked it." But the Gemara says that's not true. Lememra that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is the kashish, he's the elder. It's not true, and we're going to prove it from another conversation. For Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi had a shayla, and who did he ask? Rabbi Chanina. Just by that, by the fact that when he had a question, he asked Rab Chanina, that means that Rabbi Shua ben Levi considered Rab Chanina the elder. Now, what was the question? So we're going to go a little bit to Hilchas Shabbos. Midrabanan, one may not take medicine. One meaning someone that's not seriously ill, cannot consume medication because of the rabbinic decree that the person might grind herbs themselves on Shabbos, which is awesome. So he says that there's some sort of cress juice, and he wanted to know whether a person is allowed to drink, it's called shachalayim, whether you can drink it on Shabbos or not. And the initial understanding is that we're not speaking about a chayla sheyesh by sakana. We're speaking about a chayla she'ein by sakana, upon which normally we do apply this rabbinic of not taking any medicines on Shabbos. And we'll see what was the question. We'll clarify that in a moment. But no, it's the proof here is not about the topic. It's just by the fact that Rabbi Shua ben Levi turned to Rab Chanina for a psak means that Rab Chanina was the kashus. Rab Chanina was the elder. So he says again that hitali Rab Chanina lishtay shachalayim b'Shabbos. Now, it's beautiful how we're getting so off. Now we're going a step further away from our topic. Lishtois, the Gemara says, what was even the question? To drink cress juice? That can be that he ever had such a kasha, pshita, because it's a Mishnah in Shabbos, that kol ha'icholin, any type of food that people that are healthy commonly eat, any type of juice that people that are healthy drink, stam, even if you are sick, God forbid, and you are drinking it or eating it dafke because of its medicinal properties, there's no problem. Because it's not medicine, it's something that's eaten by all. That kol ha'icholin oichel adam l'rafua. Similarly, kol ha'mashkin ashayis, a person can drink l'rafua. So that was not the question. Now the question is much worse. The question was whether you are allowed to lishchoik, grinding, remember, is one of the malachos, whether you can grind it on Shabbos and drink shachalayim b'Shabbos. Now here again, why would anyone be allowed to break the Shabbos? And the only answer would be because it's a pikuach nefesh, because it's a chayla sheyesh by sakana. Well, if it's a chayla sheyesh by sakana, so again, what's the question? Well, how careful we have to be, like the Alter Rebbe says, that it will be a shame that if there is a pikuach nefesh on Shabbos, that the people go and ask the Rav the Shaila. That means the Rav failed in teaching everyone that if there's life involved, don't come and waste time asking a question. Go save the life. So, which will be the only reason to justify a chilul Shabbos de'oraisa. So then Mishnah Shari, then what's the question? Why would he ask Rab Chanina? If the person who needed the shachalayim was not the chaylush, however you define that, then Meisar also, then Avada, violating a rabbinic is one thing, but going and grinding, it should be prohibited. So all of this is just to clarify, the case was there was a chayla sheyesh by sakana. But you know what? You can only be machal Shabbos to do something that will be effective. And Rab Chanina had a lot of medical knowledge. So it became really a doctor's question, not a halachic question. Halachically, we know, chayla sheyesh by sakana, machal in all of us Shabbos. And the gadol should be machal Shabbos. Let the rabbi be machal Shabbos in public for people to see that you save life. Question is, will it be effective? This is what he asked. This is what Rabbi Shua ben Levi asked of Rabbi Chanina. Mi masya, does drinking crushed cress, will it heal that illness? If it heals, then yes, the nechal aleu shabbata. Or shapsa, the nechal means to be mechal Shabbos. Or the question was a medical question. Loi masya, and therefore v'loi nechal aleo shapsa. And let's go weiter. Umayshna Rabbi Chanina. Why did he ask Rabbi Chanina, even though he was an elder, but there were many other elders? And the answer is, this is good information to know. This background to all this. Mishum debaki b'refusu. Because Rabbi Chanina also happened to be an MD. He was a doctor. And how do we know that? Where do we know that from? From the following statement. Rabbi Chanina says that that no one who got, God forbid, a blow from a white mule, and that inflicts a terrible wound. And people used to come to me to figure out how to get healed or how to live. And Rabbi Chanina says, oh, that's the worst blow. No one ever lived no one ever lived after receiving a blow. Now, only a doctor would make that statement. He was a big mumch, he was a big doctor. He knew how to heal illnesses, but this was something that he couldn't heal. You got that blow, you died. Now we're getting off. We're getting on another side street. What do you mean that Rab Chanina never saw someone who got such a blow and lived? Many people get such blows and live. Maybe you don't have a medicine for it, but it's not a life-threatening always blow. So the Gemara says, no, you do. You got the wrong girsa. Rab Chanina didn't say v'choya. Rab Chanina said the word v'choyos, which means no one ever got a blow from a white mule and got fully healed. It doesn't fully heal. The Gemara is still not happy. The mitzvah, no, we know that the people do get fully healed. So the Gemara further clarifies, we're not speaking about a white mule, but we're speaking about a red mule with white tips on the feet. Ooh, that's like the gibber. That's the worst, strongest mule in the world. The sumkan, now the mule is red. It's only v'chivran reish karayu. The tips of the legs are white. That is the blow. If someone gets a blow from that, so even the great doctor Rabbi Chanina had gesagt that I never saw someone who got fully healed from such a blow. Now let's come back to our topic. So why do we see Mikol Makoim? Shmamino, the Rabbi Chanina kashish. Now, of course, people can ask, what's the raya? Maybe Rabbi Chanina was much younger, but Rabbi Chanina went to medical school. But the Gemara, for whatever reason, we're not accepting that. The fact that Rabbi Shua ben Levi turned to Rabbi Chanina, even for medical questions, it's because Rabbi Chanina was the elder. So coming back to our boya, we have to modify again the words that Rabbi Chanina said. Elohachi ka'amar. This is what Rabbi Chanina said, that she'elason ki she'ela shel rishonim. Rabbi Chanina was the elder. Rabbi Chanina and his chaverim, when they learned, we're going to modify this in a moment. They asked our boya. Our boya is if a Kohen Gadol did chafina, and sadly the Kohen Gadol passed away, and you have a backup Kohen Gadol. Question is, does the new Kohen Gadol have to do chafina again? Right? V'lokach at kedei kach, or can you use the ketoides that was already gathered? That is the boya. So Rabbi Chanina had the question, and when he heard Rabbi Shua ben Levi asking the question, Rabbi Shua ben Levi is not the elder. Rabbi Shua ben Levi is the new one, is the newcomer. And he says, wow, this newcomer is good. He's asking the question of the Rishonim referring to himself. Still not good. Oh, again, we're not addressing the question. This is just the background behind the question. Rabbi Chanina could not have said that. Rabbi Chanina could not have asked that question. For Rabbi Chanina, it's a non-question. Why is that? Listen to this, my friends. We're going to have this soon. We're going to have this on Daf Samach. Similar question. If the part of the Kohen Gadol, right? Remember the part upon which we already did two viduyim? If the part passes away after the shchita, after the dam is received, what happens now with the new Kohen Gadol? Because don't forget that the bull comes noch out of pocket from the Kohen Gadol. Similar question. Could the new Kohen Gadol use the dam hapar, or must the new Kohen Gadol go back and bring his own par? So, and Rabbi Chanina didn't ask that. Rabbi Chanina knew. Rabbi Chanina holds that bepar v'loy b'damay shel par. Clearly. So that's number one. In other words, the Kohen Gadol has to bring his own ox. He cannot bring the dam of a previous Kohen Gadol's ox. So Rabbi Chanina certainly held that the avoida of the par has to be redone.
But wait, you said if the par passes away, do you mean the Kohen Gadol passed away?
I thank you, Kevan. The Kohen Gadol passes away, thank you. He shechted the bull. The dam was received. And now the Kohen Gadol passes away. And by the way, that's mamash connected to the question that we are discussing, because the Kohen Gadol's passing away after chafina. What happened after they did the chafina? You still have to bring the ketoides lefnai v'lefnim, and only afterwards are you going to bring the blood of the part lefnai v'lefnim. Now, the next line is the whole puzzle gets completed over here. And v'amar Rab Chanina, that ketoides, if you went out of order, meaning if you first cupped your hands, you gathered the ketoides, you did chafina to the ketoides before you shechted the bull, that action is worth nothing. Now, I'm going to put everything together. according to Rabbi Hanina, that holds that if the Kohen Gadol passes away, he certainly has to bring a new par, which automatically will mean that I'll have to do a new chafina, because how would he even be able to use the ktoides that was scooped by the Kohen Gadol who passed on if that was done, right, prior to the new part that he has to bring? So for sure, Rabbi Hanina never asked that question. That's great. So clarifies the Gemara that Hachi Ka'amar, Rabbi Hanina never asked that question. But you know what? Rabbi Hanina, his opinion wasn't accepted by the colleagues of Rabbi Hanina. They held that the dam of the par could be used by the new Kohen Gadol. So the Chaveirov of Rabbi Hanina asked the question, what about, do you have to make a new chafina or not? Rabbi Hanina never had such a question, l'shitasai. Hachi ka'amar, mi dekami boyalein. The fact that Rabbi Shimon Levi is asking this question, whether this is our topic, whether you have to do chafina again, the new Kohen Gadol, Michlal is arayeh, the kosavar that Rabbi Shimon Levi holds, bepar, vafila b'domishal par. That Rabbi Shimon Levi doesn't agree with me. Rabbi Shimon Levi holds that the shchita of a par, that stands, the blood is good. And therefore, that's what he meant to say, that the boya of Rabbi Shua ben Levi is predicated on the earlier ones, not me, my chavedim. Me, I have no shaila. I hold that when the Kohen Gadol passes away at this point, one thing is for sure, he has to bring a new par. Since he has to bring a new par, so then automatically it's self-understood that the chafina will have to be done again. Because if he won't do a chafina again, then the ketores that he's going to bring into the Holy of Holies was cut prior to the avodah of the Kabbalah Saddam, and that for sure is not good. But Rabbi Hanina Taka was the elder. Rabbi Hanina knew that his shita regarding the par and the dam is not universally held. He already heard his chavedim, according to their opinion, also asking about what about the chafina. So when he heard Rabbi Shua ben Levi asking that question, he got excited. And he says, good, Rabbi Shua ben Levi is asking the question of the Rishonim. But finally, guys, we're up to 8 lines from the bottom. All of that is just a background. My Havala, that's where we're up to. In other words, this is the question. The Kohen Gadol filled his hands. The Kohen Gadol passes away. You have a backup Kohen Gadol. Can the backup Kohen Gadol use this ketores to bring it into the Holy of Holies? Or also linked to the boy of Rav Papa, there is a concept of v'lokach ve'hevi, the same Kohen Gadol, and he might have to do the step again, God willing, to be continued. How great is that? Yasher koach. I think we're going to start tomorrow a few minutes early, just a few minutes early, and we'll try to learn 2 daf tomorrow. Already getting ahead for Rosh Hashanah.
Rabbi, quick question.
Yep.
Why, if the Kabbalah comes from the lakach, why don't we call it lakacha or something like that? Why is it called Kabbalah?
So, first of all, it's a good question. Let's not forget, Yaakov, that the Torah is like a puzzle, because God is communicating so many different things using the same words. So sometimes it's just a balance. It's even the pshat. The pshat is the velakach. The pshat is going on the kohen. Velakach hakohen. You can't say velakach doesn't fit. The digduk doesn't fit with the pshat. So the drush is built on top of that, of the pshat. Doesn't go against the pshat.